Welcome to Small Arms Solutions. Today we're talking about one of the most legendary rifles of the last century. Perhaps one of the most mass-produced throughout the world of all rifles. This rifle here went into service in the 1950s, and it stayed in service right up until in the 1970s, 80s. And in fact, you'll still see it in service today, the FNFAL. The FAL rifle, the overall story is pretty interesting in how we go here. We want to go back to World War II and after World War II and the formation of NATO. One of the things that NATO wanted to do was to standardize ammunition. So they wanted to have one standard cartridge that all of our NATO allies would use in common. The British introduced the .280 British. The U.S. military introduced the we'll call it the 7.62 by 51 millimeter, which is basically a 30-06 cartridge. It was just necked down from 7.62 by 63 millimeters to 7.62 by 51. Now the British had developed that around their new EM2 rifle, which was a bullpup rifle. The cartridge was far more of a quote assault rifle cartridge. You did have an intermediate aura about it. Well, being the U.S. military being so entrenched in its tradition, and not to mention having a profound, if not dictatorial, relationship with NATO, they were able to force the 7.62 by 51 millimeter round as the new NATO cartridge. Now, my personal feeling was that put the U.S. back, behind where the Soviets were with their 7.62 by 39. We were behind them for as far as them being able to have an intermediate caliber assault rifle that could lay down controlled fully automatic fire. We ended up going to this cartridge. Well, the British, they weren't going to have it. The British had realized that what they had was a better cartridge. They had their homegrown EM2 design rifle, and they said, you know what, I don't care what NATO does. We're going to put forward. We're going to adopt the EM2 and the .280 British cartridge. So they assumed production. Well, when Winston Churchill became the prime minister again, he and the United States, I think it would probably have been President Truman at the time, basically it said, or Roosevelt, I'm not sure which, the president at that given time, had talks and discussions over it, and Churchill said, as prime minister, you will stop manufacturing EM2s and you'll stop manufacturing the .280 British caliber ammunition, and you're going to switch over to the 7.62 millimeter FAL rifle. Now, the FAL rifle had also been chambered in .280. Originally, it was. And also 7.92 by 33 Kurs. However, the British basically knew the U.S. was going to win, so they had I think they knew they were going to win. That they didn't have the clout, so they wanted to prepare for it. So the rifle was in fact chambered in 7.62 by 51. So the rest is history. It went into service with England. Went into service with Canada, some of the first countries, and it would go on to serve over 90 different countries as their primary weapon. But what we want to discuss now is the U.S. programs. Well, as many of you may or may not know, back in that time, in the 50s, Springfield Armory and Rock Island Armory were busy pumping out M1 Garands and whatnot, and there they developed what they called the T47, T42 rifles, which basically what they were an M1 Garand chambered in the new, quote, intermediate cartridge, which not really was, the 7.62 by 51. It was very similar to the M1 Garand in almost every aspect except for the barrel itself. A similar gas system, and it had a 20-round magazine. It was fully automatic as well. Now, it was under the assumption throughout the NATO trials that all the countries were going to be using the same weapon. Well, here in the United States, the United States Army was very many officers who were part of that. The whole Rock Island Armory and Springfield Armory. Their careers depended on those government arsenals pumping out guns. So they fixed it so that their T47 became the next service rifle for the U.S. military. The FAL was the T48. The T48 it was a far better rifle. It was more durable. Probably the biggest issue that it may have had was the trigger itself. The trigger wasn't as nice. The gun was far easier to control, lighter in recoil. At that same time, the AR-10 was being tested, which, quite frankly, in my opinion, of all three of the rifles, the AR-10 was truly the futuristic rifle. It was far better than most of them, but the Ordnance Corps did everything that they could to make sure that the AR-10 would fail and the FAL would fail. So they went ahead and they adopted the M14 as the T-47 as the M14, which would later go on to prove to be a big mistake, and it would be the shortest produced rifle ever in history after the M16 ousted it with the onset of the Vietnam War. There were two basic types of FALs. You had what was referred to as the metric FAL, and you had what was referred to as the imperial or inch pattern FAL. A majority of the rifles that were ever built were all the metric type. You had rifles that were built in Canada. Those were imperial. The British were imperial. But pretty much most other ones were all the metric. What that really meant was some of the components on the larger basis were compatible. However, a lot of the ones on the smaller scale were not. We're going to talk a little bit more about the metric because that was far more produced. It was produced in South America. It was produced, for instance, Austria. It was produced by just multiple countries, Colombia. Even many of these rifles were produced for countries like West Germany. West Germany is rather interesting too because FN produced a lot of rifles for West Germany. West Germany wanted to actually build them themselves in the company or in their country, and it was a very sharp no. Belgium had been occupied by Germany twice in that first half of the century, so the last thing they were going to do was to give the Germans ability to manufacture their rifle. So that was where you saw the quick adoption of the Septme rifle to form the HKG3, which at that time I think the Germans were just looking for an excuse to switch over from the FAL to the G3. But interestingly enough, Belgium was very sensitive to parts of the war. So what we're going to talk a little bit about here is this rifle here. Now, we talk about a lot when we talk about AR-15s, M16s, the term TDP rifle or mil-spec rifle. Well, what you're seeing here, manufactured by DSArms out of Illinois, this is a mil-spec rifle, and let me explain to you how that happened. In the 1990s, around that time period is when Austria switched over from their FAL rifle, their STG, over to the Steyr AUG. So at that time, they were being decommissioned. DSArms went over and they purchased not only the technical data package, meaning all the prints, all the information, they procured parts, components, as well as all the tooling and machinery that was being used in Austria and brought it over to the United States. So what does that mean? That means the rifles that are coming out of DSA are designed and manufactured off of the original Austrian technical data package. And what you see here is their standard metric FAL, the SA58, which is, I believe, SA58 7.62 rifle. Now, when you look at DSArms, or hear DSArms, you think of FAL. I don't think there's any company in this entire country that is more legendary or more well-known for FAL rifles. The way most of these guns entered into the country is parts kits, due to the fact that they were pretty much military-grade rifles. A lot of them were still fully automatic, even though a majority of the FALs that were issued were semi-automatic only. There were still versions that were fully automatic. They came in as parts kits. DSArms was one of the first companies to start making receivers for these. So you would have parts kits coming in from, you'd have ones coming in from Colombia, you'd have ones coming in from Brazil, you'd have them coming in from Germany, Austria, Belgium itself, Israel. You literally have kits coming from all over the world, and they were built. Where the DSArms rifle, this was the first fully U.S.-made rifle. And what I mean by fully made, I mean everything. Nothing you see on this rifle came out of any parts kit whatsoever. They use the same machines and manufacture them off of the same prints as they have since the early 1990s. So what you're getting here is a true military-grade rifle. Now, they've really taken the rifle to several steps. They've modernized it to make it more compatible with today's situation, such as having flat top rails, having flat top upper handguards. They've had rail systems on here. They've actually even had sniper type versions of them. They manufacture carbines. They even manufacture pistols in this version. The one that I wanted to look at was I wanted to look at the original FAL that would have been considered, as we've always heard, the right arm of the free world, which was the name that the FAL was given. So what we're seeing here is the basic military configuration of the rifle. So we're going to go a little bit over it. The first thing I want to say that's different about this rifle is the finish. This is all Duracoat finish. A lot of the original ones were either blued, or they were parkerized or reparkerized or painted. All the FAL rifles that are manufactured by DSArms are in fact coated in the Duracoat. Going from the front back, we're going to talk about the muzzle itself. Now, this muzzle brake here was one that was adopted in many of the metric rifles. The original inch pattern rifles, imperial pattern rifles, you had a longer, it was like a flash suppressor with 5 vents that went all the way around. There was a lot of issues with durability over those vents, so they switched to 3 vents. And then they went down to this version that you see here, which has vent holes that bleed the gas forward. This also worked as a grenade launcher, as well as it took a bayonet. In fact, we'll take a look at the bayonet that would actually go on this rifle. And it's not your typical bayonet which you would see. But what that would do is it would go underneath, then it would pop up and it would engage. And you can see you had slits on the top here where it still allowed the gas to escape. So yeah, it's a pretty interesting type of a bayonet, but that's the one that was used. Now, we don't have any grenades obviously here to show you how that works, but the inside of this is threaded as well to accept a blank firing adapter, which we have here would be a typical blank firing adapter, which would just screw right into the end of the muzzle for training purposes. Now, the barrel itself is manufactured from ordnance steel. This particular barrel is not chrome plated. The barrels are actually very, very well made. I was very pleased with the accuracy that I got out of this, even though that it was iron sights. The next thing we're going to look at is the bipod itself. This was the standard kind of bipod that was used. It actually has 2 rollers in here to help an easier transition. Now, when these would fold into place, they would go into the receiver. It would fold right in. So it would stay out of the way. Then it was very easy to deploy. And I do have to say, I installed these on here myself, and it was a complete pain in the ass. Doing it with trying to do it with 2 hands, you really need some kind of a vise to hold the thing into place, and a second person to actually insert the screw. Once you have this pushed in, the weight of these springs in here is ungodly. You can also see we have aggressive spikes in the bottom there for getting into dirt or digging into whatever you're going to put onto it. Looking at the front sight base itself, you have it's the low profile. You do have the 2 wings on here, standard front sight post. Next thing we're going to talk a little bit about is the gas valve here, which is what you see right here. The FAL has a fully adjustable gas valve. Now, that can be good, that can be bad. For your average soldier, not so good, because they're going to think, well, if I open it up all the way, the gun's always going to work. Well, the problem is if you overgas this thing, you're going to beat the hell out of it, and you're going to wear it out very prematurely. So what you're supposed to do is, depending on your environmental conditions and your ammunition, you would tune the gas system, which all that would mean would be you would go out to the range, you would close it, you would close the gas block up. You'd probably fire your first round. You would have either the bolt wouldn't move, or you would have a failure to extract. Then as you open it up a little bit, fire another round. Your goal is to have the bolt lock back on the magazine. So you would keep adjusting upward until you got to that point at minimum. So when you would get to that point, you probably would want to go maybe 3 or 4 or 5 clicks more open to adjust so you had enough power when it was dirty. When you fire the rifle, you're going to actually see how the ejection pattern is. If these cartridges are just falling out of the rifle, you need more gas. But you also don't want them, launching, 100 yards. You want to have just enough for it to cycle, plus some additional, so it would work with a variation in ammunition and also your environmental conditions. For instance, if you were to had this rifle and you had your adjustment set for the summertime, now you're going to be going out in the wintertime, you would not use the same setting. You would go back to it and you would test it in a cold environment, and you probably would have to open it up some more to compensate for the propellant. So when you do this, you always want to start from the closed position and work your way up. You don't want to do it the opposite way. You don't want to overgas it, because it's going to save you on recoil. It's going to save the wear and tear on the rifle itself. This was one of the few rifles that you really saw that were weren't self-regulating, that you had the ability to adjust. So along with that, we have also another valve. The valve over on the side here, which we're going to turn this over. This valve here, which you see, is your actual gas on and off. So right now you have your gas on, so the rifle will cycle by itself. Pushing that in and rotating it all the way over to the other side, now you've completely shut your gas off, so it's going to work as a very expensive single action rifle. So you literally can cut your gas off for use with a grenade launcher. If you didn't want to have to chase after your cartridge cases, you could do that, but you did have that ability on it whatsoever. Now the handguards itself, these are actually a polymer handguard. The original rifles would come with aluminum handguards. Myself personally, I think aluminum handguards are silly because of how hot they would get. I can tell you that just the polymer alone, it doesn't take very many magazines for that to get awfully hot. But these are all made in the USA as well. Let me go back over to the other side. You can see we have our carrying handle. Again, all this is all made in the US. You have your ejection port right here. You also have your bolt. We're going to look at the bolt a little bit more closely coming up, but you can actually see the sand cuts that were put into there as well, so these guns would work much better in the desert. You have your magazine release right here. That releases the magazine. And then you also have on the bottom your bolt catch. So as you would pull back the bolt, you lift up, and now you have the bolt locked to the rear. This rifle on its last shot will lock open to the rear, providing you have the gas setting properly. You have two magazines. These are actually both Austrian pattern magazines made by DSArms. They have their own facility where they manufacture their own magazines, 30 rounds and 20 rounds. You can find occasionally 5 and 10s as well. You have a two-piece receiver. This is manufactured from steel, the upper receiver, and the lower is often is also steel. Can be, you may find some lighter material ones anyways. Flipping it back over again, we're going to see the safety. That would be safe, semi, and on the ones that were auto, that would flip all the way over here for automatic. As I previously stated, most of these rifles were issued with the automatic removed. It just wasn't effective on a rifle this heavy in caliber. The sight, as you can see, has adjustments from 200 to 1,000 meters. Slides back and forth. Its rearmost position is at 200 meters. These are all going to be in meters for as far as the adjustments themselves. The stock is a polymer stock. Many of the FALs you would see would use a lot of wood. You could see wood stocks, you'd see wood handguards, you'd see wood pistol grips. This particular model was probably more of the modern, if you want to say more of the later production FALs. And why would you want plastic over wood? Well, for many reasons. First of all, the polymers can be stronger. Second of all, when these things get wet, they don't swell like wood does. They also don't burn as quickly as wood does either on heavy volume of fire. They're lighter, and when you have cold weather, your face is not going to stick to one of these things. It's not going to be nearly as brutal at being cold as the wood is. But you can see these guns come in many different configurations. The rifle is a short stroke tappet as far as the way the piston works. We're going to show a little bit about how this thing comes apart. We have the lever on the side that opens up. Upper on the bolt catch. Open up. Now we can pull the bolt carrier mechanism out. We also pull the feed cover right off as well, or the top tray. With this being the Austrian pattern, you did not have the top feed like you did on the Canadian and the British ones. It was all magazines were all loaded by hand. They weren't loaded from the horseshoes on top or the stripper clips. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take out the operating rod so you can basically see how that looks. We're again going to rotate. Remove this is the actual gas valve itself. Now we're going to pull right out the operating rod along with the recoil spring. So what's happening is, being short stroke tappet, is the gas is going to impinge, push rearward on the piston. This is going to knock out the front, and it's going to strike the face of the bolt carrier itself. Relatively clean. I can tell you I fired probably, usually 200 rounds out of this thing at a pop. The back of the carrier itself is fairly clean. I don't really see too much of an issue. Like anything else, you will get your filth up here, and using an Otis bronze brush or stainless steel brush, you can remove all the all the carbon fouling right off of that. The recoil spring itself on the fixed stock models actually is within the stock itself. So you have this rod here, which pushes inward on the plunger. To remove the bolt, we actually push inward on the firing pin and it will drop right out. So this is your bolt itself. You don't normally have to take the bolt apart. You just basically always want to make sure you clean your breech face. You want to clean your inside your extractor. To remove the firing pin, you would have to use a drift pin for the most part to actually push that right out. You can take it apart for regular maintenance, but it's not really necessary. As you can see, the carrier itself, you'll see the lightning cuts on both sides, which again are designed for the cold weather. So I'm going to drop that back into place. Now, for those of you who are interested in a modernized FAL, you can get a receiver covers from DSArms, which actually has a 1913 rail on the top, if that's the route that you would like to go. Again, I wanted the traditional one, so that's what you're seeing here. They make a lot of modernized FALs, carbine lengths, SBR lengths. They make fully automatic ones. They really have a full line of FAL rifles. But this is the classic. This is the one that we've seen throughout the world. Even more interesting, there was one little battle that both sides themselves used this rifle. That was the Falklands. Both the British and the troops in the Falklands that they fought against also utilized FALs. So that's just literally how popular they are. Now you can, with a screwdriver, we could remove the handguards. I see no point in that. On the Austrian pattern, you have the gas block goes out to about here with the tube, about here. So you actually have this open space where the op rod goes through. Some of the FALs will have that as a solid tube. There are many different versions depending on the country. Whenever a country adopted it, they found things that they wanted that were different from the standard version. So although they're all FALs, they all wanted something different, whether it was a type of a sight, type of a front sight post, a muzzle device, whether they wanted to have a bipod or not, or what type of bipod that they wanted to have. This one is again the roller, or it's probably the nicest one with the rollers. But they have ones that just will lock into the second position, the open position. These ones will roll much easier. The cocking handle we have on here is round. On many of the Imperial or inch pattern FNs, this will be a folding lever. And I have to say, I prefer this knob here over the folding lever. I find that's a little bit more punishing on my hands. When you look at the quality of this rifle, this rifle is tremendous. Shooting it is a pleasure. Once you get everything tuned in with it, it's a fairly smooth shooting rifle. The only really complaint that I could have about it would be the trigger. If you guys would like to learn more about this rifle, I have to tell you it is a fascinating story. The number of variations, the different countries that these things were produced in, even some of the politics that we'll go into, what countries would be able to produce them. I believe FN out of Belgium produced far less rifles than they licensed out from several of these other countries who have built these rifles. But the true books are what you see right here. One is called the FNFAL, and one is called the Fabled FAL. They are both collector-grade publication books. They are both authored by R. Blake Stevens. These are, without a doubt, the Bibles, on the development of this weapon system, and I think you'd find it very, very fascinating. It's far more than I could ever even hope to try to cover here. There's another video section that was put out by a gentleman out of Arkansas, Mishiko, on his page on YouTube. He has a 5-part series where he talks about FALs. He has a very nice collection of them, and he's extremely well versed. You'd be able to see a very good representation of several of the different countries and their variations, and he can show you the physical differences. That's another place that you might want to look as well. My main mandate was to show you the DSArms FAL, and for those of you who want a true military grade FAL as you would have seen in service throughout the world, this was the rifle right here. The prices are very, very reasonable. American made guns, and like we spoke a little bit earlier, we have an actual TDP gun. These are made off of the original drawings for the Austrian rifles. I think the Austrian rifles are probably some of the nicer ones as well. Many of you are familiar with Steyr. They actually made the AUG, which replaced this rifle. So you can imagine the quality itself that they would have to be. The ones out of Belgium, there's a lot of collector's value to those as well. These I would not say of collector value. These are shooters. These are guns that you're actually going to go out and shoot, versus the ones that you're going to have in a collection that you're not going to want to shoot. Reassembly of this rifle, as you can see, is extremely easy. The gas valve back in. Now, this is something that I would recommend that you would do pretty much any time that you would shoot, pretty much like any rifle, just due to the fact that you do get a lot of carbon buildup in the gas block itself on the piston. The other thing that the pistons are known to do is in cold weather is to actually freeze up, which is one of the benefits of the direct gas system. So we're putting this back, the the valve back in itself, and we're now back in the fire position. This is a true shooter's gun. It's not one you would want to just throw in your safe as a safe queen. It's designed well. It's designed to be used. If you want to go to DSArms webpage, you can take a look and see at the different paratrooper models, shorter barrels. This is the standard 21-inch barrel that you would have seen for the most part. In my evaluation of this rifle, I definitely would have seen this as being a far better choice for the M14 rifle than the T47. I think it's far more advanced. I think it's better built. I think it's a more reliable and more robust system than the rifle that ended up being the M14. The AR-10, I think, probably would have beat out them both if they would have actually been given a chance. But due to the corruption that plagued our Ordnance Corps, this rifle and the AR-10 never had a shot. It wasn't until the final screw of the M16 program that Secretary of Defense McNamara finally shut down the Ordnance Corps because of their failure of the U.S. soldier since the Revolutionary War. That's how far it goes back that they've kept the U.S. soldier behind many of its enemies. This rifle also comes with a pretty good manual. It's probably more in depth than anything. It's even more like an armorer's manual. I definitely would not recommend, if you don't know what you're doing with this rifle, trying to work on it yourself without the experience, even though you have a manual here. If you have any serious issues, it does need to go to a competent gunsmith. But the FNFAL has become, and it still is, one of the most popular rifles of all time. It's still in use. By today's standards, it's considered outdated because of the fact that this is not set up for optics. And for as far as its selector lever capability being limited to semi-automatic only, if you look at many of the 7.62 rifles today, they're far more controllable than this thing ever was. So you can see a difference in that. But it is still viable. It is still would be a force to be reckoned with on the battlefield. DSArms has done a great job keeping the STG, I believe it was the STG58, alive, utilizing all that technical data. They're also one of the biggest suppliers for parts. So if you have any interest in getting a FAL, that's who you want to see. I think what we're going to do now is we're going to take this out to the range and we're going to see how it shoots. The FNFAL is truly a piece of history. Again, I think it well deserved the name, the right hand of the free world, because it was used by more than 90 countries, NATO and other alike. The rifle's been produced probably by many more countries than any other rifle in history, under contract or under licensing agreements throughout the world, on every continent. If you were to look up, you would probably be surprised to see all the countries that have adopted this. Still to be seen in the battlefield. Excellent shooter. Again, the only real problem I ever had with it was the trigger itself. It's again, this was never meant to be a assault or a match grade or a sniper rifle. This was developed to be a assault rifle, a combat rifle, and that's exactly what it does. If you have any questions on this rifle, please feel free to leave me a comment. I'll see if I can answer it. But again, I want to stress, if you have interest in this rifle, those 2 books that I showed you, that is going to be your full and complete history. I thank you guys very much for watching, and please share, and even better, subscribe. Thank you.